In 1932, a family of 6 in the Dust Bowl lived on a single recurring meal that cost less than a nickel. Today, science shows that meal contained a rare form of resistant starch that modern medicine is trying to replicate in $100 pills. We spend billions on immune boosters, yet the generation that survived the Great Depression had stronger cellular resilience than we do. Today, as a doctor, I'm revealing the 7 forgotten famine recipes that accidentally created the ultimate longevity protocol. Let's look at the pot. Meal 1. The Dust Bowl. Onion and water soup. The Quercetin Shield. During the height of the Great Depression, when the soil turned to dust and the cattle died, there was one vegetable that refused to quit: the onion. In the Hoovervilles and the migrant camps, mothers made what they called water soup. It was exactly what it sounds like: 5 onions, a gallon of water, and a pinch of salt. As a doctor, when I analyze this famine meal, I see a biological masterclass. When you slow simmer onions for 4 hours, you are performing a massive extraction of quercetin and allicin. Quercetin is a potent zinc ionophore. It acts like a key that unlocks your cells to let zinc in, stopping viral replication in its tracks. The people who lived on this soup didn't have access to antibiotics or vitamins. They had water soup. But that liquid was so dense in sulfur compounds that it kept their respiratory systems clear and their arterial walls flexible. I interviewed a 97-year-old survivor who still makes this water soup once a week. She told me, "We weren't eating for taste, we were eating to stay standing." In reality, she was building a vascular shield that has lasted her nearly a century. This is the first rule of survival longevity. The humblest ingredients often hold the most complex medicine. In the post-war years of the 1940s, meat was a luxury, but the waist, the knuckles, the feet, and the marrow bones was often given away for free. The working class would take these bones and boil them until they turned into a thick, grayish mash that looked like porridge. Modern biohackers call this bone broth and sell it in fancy glass jars. But the famine mash was different. It was concentrated collagen, glycine, and, most importantly, bone marrow fat. Bone marrow is the site of red and white blood cell production. When you consume the marrow of a healthy animal, you are ingesting the very building blocks of the immune system. The children who grew up on this mash in the 40s developed bone mineral density that far exceeds what we see in the fortified cereal generation of today. Glycine, the primary amino acid in this marrow, is the precursor to glutathione, the master antioxidant of the human body. These people were fueling their cellular repair systems with the most bioavailable protein on Earth, while believing they were just eating scraps. It is a profound irony of history. The parts of the food we now throw away are the parts that allowed our ancestors to survive the hardest decades of the 20th century. Meal 3. The dandelion and lard sauté. The liver purifier. During the hungry winters of Europe, when the cupboards were bare, people turned to the only thing that grew for free: the dandelion. They would dig up the bitter greens and sauté them in a single spoonful of lard or bacon grease. To the modern eye, this looks like a meal of desperation. But to a doctor, this is a perfect metabolic reset. Dandelion greens are the most powerful natural bitter tonic for the liver. Bitterness triggers the release of T2R receptors in the gut, which signals the liver to dump stagnant bile and begin the process of phase 2 detoxification. But here is the survival secret: the lard. We have been told for 50 years that animal fat is the enemy. But the fat in that pan was the vehicle for the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, and K2, found in the greens. Without the fat, the nutrients in the dandelion would never have reached the cells. This famine sauté kept the liver clean and the hormones balanced in a generation that faced extreme stress. They didn't have liver detox teas. They had the weeds in their backyard and the fat in their pan. It was a lesson in biological synergy that we have traded for low-fat, high-sugar processed foods that are destroying our metabolic health. Meal 4. The stale bread. Panade, the cardiac strengthener. In the tenements of New York and the villages of Italy, stale bread was never discarded. It was turned into panade, a thick, warming porridge made of bread crusts, garlic, water, and perhaps a drop of oil. Italian immigrants brought this recipe with them, and it became a survival staple for the men who built the skyscrapers of Manhattan. Why did these men, who lived on bread and garlic, have heart health that baffled researchers in the 1950s? The answer lies in the garlic and the fermentation of the bread. Stale, traditional sourdough bread contains resistant starch that feeds the Akkermansia bacteria in the gut, the bacteria responsible for maintaining the gut lining. When you combine that with the raw, crushed garlic added at the end, you are creating a potent cardiovascular tonic. Garlic thins the blood naturally, preventing the clots that lead to strokes, while the bread porridge provided the slow-burning glucose needed for 12 hours of manual labor. This wasn't empty carbs. This was a targeted fuel for the heart and the gut. A retired dock worker once told me, "The bread was old, but the men were strong." He was right. They were building cardiac resilience with every bowl, using nothing but the leftovers of the day before. In 1944, during the darkest days of the war in Northern Europe, scurvy was a real threat. Fresh fruit was non-existent. The survivors relied on a forgotten method, the cabbage and apple ferment. They would shred cabbage with wild, tart apples and pack them into jars with salt. This wasn't a condiment like sauerkraut today. It was a primary source of survival. Fermentation increases the vitamin C content of cabbage by nearly 20 times. But the addition of the apple provided the pectin, a fiber that heals the intestinal wall. As a doctor, I see the result of our sanitized diet every day in the form of leaky gut and autoimmune disease. Our ancestors, by eating these fermented famine jars, were constantly inoculating their digestive tracts with beneficial lactobacillus. They were maintaining an internal pharmacy that protected them from the infections that killed those who relied on processed rations. One woman I interviewed, who survived the siege of Leningrad, told me that a single tablespoon of this ferment was considered more valuable than a loaf of bread. She was 99 years old when we spoke, and her immune system was still biologically aggressive. She had built a fortress of bacteria that lasted a lifetime. Let's go back to the steelworkers. In the mills of the 1930s, the heat was so intense that men would lose 10 pounds of water in a single shift. They lived on a bowl of buckwheat and salt. Buckwheat is not a grain. It is a seed related to rhubarb. It is the world's highest source of rutin, a bioflavonoid that protects the microvessels in the eyes and the brain. But the key was the salt. These men didn't have Gatorade or electrolyte powders. They added unrefined sea salt to their buckwheat to prevent the collapse of their adrenal glands. When you are under extreme physical or emotional stress, your body dumps sodium. If you don't replace it with the trace minerals found in sea salt, your cortisol levels skyrocket, leading to heart failure and exhaustion. These workers were adrenal mapping. By eating this salty, mineral-dense porridge, they kept their blood pressure stable and their heart strong under conditions that would kill a modern office worker in hours. It is a 20-cent meal that provides more neurological protection than a cabinet full of modern brain boosters. Finally, we have the navy bean pot. During the hobo era of the 1930s, these beans were the gold standard of survival. But the secret was the vinegar. They would simmer the beans with a splash of apple cider vinegar at the very end. Navy beans are incredibly dense in alpha-galactosidase and fiber, but the vinegar was the magic ingredient. Modern clinical studies now prove that a single tablespoon of vinegar with a high-fiber meal can lower the insulin response by up to 30%. These famine survivors didn't have insulin resistance because their meals were designed to be metabolically flat. They ate large amounts of fiber with an acidic buffer, the vinegar, which kept their blood sugar perfectly stable. This is the exact opposite of the modern health bar or protein shake that causes a massive insulin spike. A 91-year-old man I met in Kansas still eats his beans with vinegar every Tuesday. He told me, "It keeps the blood light." He was right. He was preventing the thick blood that leads to hypertension and diabetes, using nothing but a bag of 10-cent beans and a bottle of vinegar. The global health industry doesn't want you to look at these 7 famine recipes. There is no profit margin in a bag of buckwheat, a jar of onion skins, or a handful of dandelion roots. They would rather sell you a $50 bottle of immune support pills that contain a fraction of the bioavailable nutrients found in a bowl of pot liquor or water soup. But the 97-year-old widow and the 91-year-old steelworker are the living proof that they are wrong. These meals were never about being cheap or poor. They were about the biological engineering of survival. Our ancestors took the scraps of the earth and turned them into life-saving medicine. My challenge to you is simple. This week, make one of these: the onion soup, the bone mash, or the navy beans with vinegar. Sit at your table, set a place for yourself, and eat it slowly. Feel the minerals. Feel the connection to the generations of humans who survived the impossible because they knew how to extract strength from simplicity. Your health is not a product you buy. It is a legacy you practice. These famine recipes are the forgotten protocol of the strongest humans who ever lived. If this video opened your eyes to the truth, subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments. Which survival meal did your family use to make? Because at Vaxalis, we believe the best health insurance is what's simmering in your kitchen. I'm the doctor, and I'll see you at the next pot. Thanks for watching.